But we repeat that. We repeat that. From the economic perspective also, we need to look at what enslavement, I allude to it a little bit in the film, but to think more about what enslavement has meant for the economic foundations of this nation. So we need to study. You talked about bonds. We were bonds. You know, we basically were the economic engine for our nation. And so that too, we need to look at. And then we need to look at some of our economic heroes like A.G. Gadsden, Alabama, Black Tiger. We need to look at people, you know, John Johnson. White folks were so evil, they would not lend the man money to start a magazine, but they would lend him money to go on vacation using his mama's furniture as collateral. However, even with that kind of evil, many of us were able to both accumulate and to develop fortunes. And today, with more people, with more degrees, and more so-called good sense, we basically don't have, essentially, kind of sense that A.G. Gadsden had, with a 7th grade education, who started out selling sandwiches to his fellow workers who were working in the mines. And that was the foundation of his wealth. He went on from that to own hotels, to own radio stations, to own a television station, to own an insurance company, to do some light manufacturing. So we really need to be extremely clear about that. And so when we know our economic history, when we understand our economic history, then we really do understand the contributions of our people and the strength of our people. You know, we never ever talked about HBCUs being in trouble until very recently. But our HBCUs were supported by sisters who were frying chicken, sisters who were baking pound cakes, and doing that kind of thing. And we never heard. In 1940, nobody would say, this college and that college and the other college is in trouble and it might not survive. We had 105 HBCUs. I think now we have 102. And several are in trouble. And part of it is because of us. We don't support our institutions. But you know what? When I was president of Bennett College, people would call me, well, when I first went, black people said to me, why would you go to an HBCU? What's wrong with you? And I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I love black people. I mean, I wouldn't do all this work for white people. So, you know, I mean, there's too much work to do for white people. But I definitely do it for black people. Now, but some of the very Negroes who told me, why are you going to this HBCU? When their trifling little child got put out of wherever, down the phone, Malcolm, y'all have any room? I'm like, no. The white folks don't want them, I don't want them. And I didn't read it like, when I was sort of like, you didn't support me when I can't say give you $1,000, you know you have. Now you want your child to come to my school, then I said, well, they can come if they pay full tuition. Nobody wants to pay full tuition. But in any case, so I guess I can conclude with that. And basically saying that we have been economic actors. We have been successful economic actors. The act of self-emancipation is significant. People purchase themselves. It's extremely significant. I always wish I could be a sociologist and go in the time machine to figure out who ran away, who purchased themselves, and who stayed. The 3 kinds of enslaved people. Women were more likely to stay because they had children. A lot of folks stayed because they were just scared. You know, they just plain old scared. And they probably had a right to be given what kind of things they had in mind for us. But you know, Minister Farrakhan told me once that I would have the spirit of a runaway slave, and I said, Brother Minister, would you prefer a stay-at-home slave? Just for the record. You know, but you know, again, so when I mentioned John Parker in the film, John Parker was responsible for white people losing at least $1 million worth of property. If you value each enslaved person as about $1,000, and he got 900 people free. Think about that. So thank you.
Same question. In relation to history, economically, what have we lost?
Now we're gonna all sound the same up here almost.
So, Dr. Tyrene, Wright, I'm an author, historian. I consider myself a human rights activist. I try. I'm sorry, all of a sudden started losing my voice. Okay.
You sit too close to me. Not with mine.
I know. Okay, so can you hear me now? Yes. All right. Dr. Tyrene, Wright, so author, historian, human rights activist, I try that, and producer, publisher. So to answer the question is, I talk about that in this book. Can I turn around just really quick? The sustainable model that was the Tuskegee model. And I'm just going to read one little thing right here. This is what we lost, okay? This is the kind of communities that we had. And I use Tuskegee as one of those models because what happens is that Washington perfects this model and attempts to export it throughout the African world. And so this is what an author, a journalist of the Chicago Record Herald wrote about Tuskegee. He said, Tuskegee is not a school in the ordinary sense of the word. It's a city in itself, a community that dominates a whole county. It's a great industrial plant with 40 trades and industries that consumes all its own products, that erects its own buildings, first by making its own bricks, that grows its own food and makes its own clothes, writes and prints its own textbooks, all by way of education.
Wow.
That's what we had. We had sustainable communities of our own, okay? 12 years out of enslavement, and even into the period that is known as our nadir, 1895 to 1915, we had unbelievable progress. We're living in the backlash. We've done it. We've done it. You don't have to look anywhere else. You just have to conjure those models or revisit those models. I'll give you an example of models. There's only 9 copies out there, but you can. But there's examples of that. This is an example of that model, a self-sustaining community where we produce everything that we consumed. Okay? So the difference, how we can do that again is this. Who's your medical doctor? Does he look like you? Who's your dentist? Does he look like you? Or does she look like you? Okay? Those are the questions I ask. If you want to do something today, who's your lawyer? Who's your accountant? Okay? Do they look like you?
Yes,
Every time people who consider themselves white want to challenge me about their support of our communities, I ask them, who's your medical doctor? Who's your family doctor?
Yes.
Who's your dentist? Who's your lawyer? Okay? You know? Certainly not us, but we need to do that. I called the dentist the other day. I said, excuse me, but are any of the dentists in your office black? Oh no, they're, Indian from Asia. I said, okay, no problem, no offense, but thank you. And I moved on to the next one, that I could. You have to be very real and deliberate about those things. That's what we lost, okay? We don't support our professionals. And yes, we're still here in this country, so ultimately that money is taxed and you contribute to the building of this nation. So the other part of what we do is start making those connections on the continent, okay? Because we can do that. We should not feel like we can't do that. We can connect economically and build. And we'll get more into that. I want to skip ahead, but that's what we lost. We lost that idea and concept and practice of doing it for ourselves. We're scared.
Right.
But we've done it. We've done it. We don't have to look any further. Everything we're doing now is all the backlash for the unbelievable progress we did for the first 50 years out of enslavement. We want to save ourselves. Nobody's coming for us. It's us.
Yes.
It's us.
Yes. Yes.
I'm Mfundishi, Jhutyms, Ka, in Peru, and Salim. And I'm going to come from a slightly different perspective. My background, I'm an Africologist, a historian, archaeologist, chematologist, holistic healer, grandmaster in the martial arts. I want to say 2 things that I think we've lost. Number 1, we've lost our mind. That's number 1.
That's it.
So that means
That's
even
it.
if I give you something good, you can't do anything with it.
True.
From inside out, upside down, and backwards, I can give you the greatest philosophy in the world, and you don't know what to do with it. We need to change our thinking pattern. See, not just owning stores, owning businesses, going to a black doctor is not going to stop it, especially if they're thinking like the Europeans are.
Yes.
You need to change your thinking paradigm. Symptomatic thought. And when she talked about Tuskegee, that was symptomatic thought. What are the symptoms that lead towards success? What are the symptoms that have you have total control? Like I'm on my way to Ghana in a couple of days. Ghana is the leading producer of the cocoa bean. 75% of all cocoa comes from Ghana, but they don't have one manufacturing plant. There's a problem there. Some people who pick the chocolate, the cocoa bean, never even tasted chocolate. There's a problem there. Symptomatic thought. What are the symptoms in each area when somebody else is educating you? And then you wonder why you come back with a PhD and you're not doing nothing for society. Even if and we send our greatest minds to European schools. I'm looking. Somebody who went off the chart, they got a scholarship to go to Harvard. And all of the Ivy League schools are arguing and debating on our minds. We got to educate our own. What are the symptoms that will lead towards that? So symptomatic thought versus symbolic thought. The second part I wanted to shoot out was that to develop something and not be able to protect it, it's like not having it at all. So we talk about these fabulous societies that were still thinking European, even though we were developing ourselves. We did not defend ourselves. When we looked at ancient Kemetic, import, export, what we didn't talk about was the defense system that we had, the Magi warriors, the warriors that protected the cargo, international and national. They traded all the way from South Africa to all the way to Kemetic, the cargo got there. They traded in punt all the way to Asia. The cargo got there and it was protected. Today, we are dependent upon our enemy to protect our export and import.
Yes.
That's not going to work, y'all. We have to change our thinking. Symptomatic thought. What are the symptoms? We got to recapture our own language. If you're speaking only in the language of your oppressor, you're insane.
Thank you.
I'll say it again. If you only know the language of your oppressor, you're insane. You might have a little Afrocentric twist to your insanity, but you're still insane. And your enemy knows what you're going to do because he taught you how to think. You went to his school.
Yes.
You went to his economics. You got his degrees.
Yes.
We have to sanction ourselves. All of us, I like to say myself, I'm in recovery. Just like an alcoholic is in recovery. I've been off of the plantation for 40 years. I haven't taken any of the economic way of life in terms of their economy. I don't wear their clothes. I stay out of their stores. I don't spend my money with them. And I don't have an uncle named Sam. Okay, all right. So you got to divorce yourself and be serious about it. Then you get with like minds who are thinking like you. And like the sister said, we got everything we need except for our mind back. And you have to be able to defend whatever you develop. Malcolm said the price of freedom is death. I know that scares some of you. I used to tell my warriors, every day is a good day to die. If that's not in the back of your head, then you don't have nothing to live for.
He talked about cocoa in Ghana. Brother Sinclair, can you stand up real quick?
Yeah.
I just want to give this brother a shout out. If you're talking about cocoa, this brother right here has a program. You need to get with this brother. He's connected to the continent when it comes to cocoa. Got it?
Yeah.
See this brother. Okay, thank you very much. Now, the big man, Dr. J. Same question. Are you ready? The question is, economically, what have we lost? Historically, economically, today, what have we lost from the past? Say it in English, don't say it in French.
Well, Brother Mataki told me that we have to get out of this place shortly. So there's no basis for me to begin a serious discussion of that question. However, since you are here and we have an obligation to lead you in the right direction, I'd like to add my 2 cents to that. And I've been consistent in trying to add it, because what just as our brother DC was trying to talk to you about symptomatic thought, and our sister, Dr. Wright, was giving you a model of working within the system when we shouldn't have been surviving with it, but somehow they had the genius to survive. And Dr. Marlowe was talking about models of success that we had against the odds. My strong statement is that nothing that you do will have any meaning unless it's tied to economics. But if all you have is an economics of consumerism or predatory capitalism, then that economics is not going to take you anywhere. Economics is the foundation. Economics is not just what you do in exchange of money and whatnot, but economics is what you do to control your productive and creative capabilities. And you have to have an analysis of capabilities because you have to deal with systems. Most of us suffer greatly from a lack of clarity because we do not have a systems analysis. Everything is systems related. Nothing happens in the universe unless it's tied to systems. Nothing happens in the universe outside of you, in the universe in your community, or the universe inside of you, which is the various biological systems that you have to master. We've lost mastery of systems understanding. And with the lack of the mastery of systems understanding, we can only reach the level of what I call survival culture. If you're going to go anywhere, as this movie production is trying to let us know, we were there. We renewed ourselves many times over thousands of years. That's an enormous story that we have been there. We don't need to look for the capitalist model coming out of China or the US or Russia. We need to look to the model of creating wealth that our ancestors laid down for us and sustained it for thousands of years. And you have a political structure, not to do politics, but you have a political structure, which is your administrative capability to manage your wealth building. Amen. Economics and politics is the foundation of everything. If you don't have that foremost in what you're going to be about, you ain't going nowhere. You have to have a plan. If you don't plan, you plan to fail. Well, economics allows you to plan. And you have to manage what you have. If you don't have a management capability, you will mismanagement or lose it. Right. So the foundation of anything we do is economy politique. And where did I hear that? When I went to study in Europe. And when I went to study in Europe in 1959-60, that's what they were trying to get across to the Europeans. If you're going to rebuild a devastated Europe, destroyed because 100 million people were murdered or killed, white on white crime, there's nothing comparable of it in Chicago. They can talk about babies being killed in Chicago, but white folks have a recorded record of white on white crime to the tune of 100 million people. And that's the second round that occurred within a 50-year period. So you got World War I of European insanity, where 100 million people were destroyed or injured. And then you have a period of joy and money-making. That's called the Roaring 20s. And then they slipped back into the reality of their predator value system. And so you had the Great Depression and the Great Crash. And so the next 10 years in the 30s, you was dealing with Germany, which had been a wealthy nation, where to get a loaf of bread, you have to take a barrel of Deutschmark to get a loaf of bread. You have to understand the history of the most recent time to understand that if you don't have a system, you're not going anywhere. So you have World War I, 100 million Europeans killing each other, gassing each other. Over what? They were trying to get the prize outside of Europe, which was South America, the islands of the Pacific, Africa. The economic prize of Africa meant that they could put their system back together again. Another collapse. They mismanaged the world. And you go into World War II. It's not a question of Hitler. It's a question of understanding him as a manifestation of their economics. And his desire to produce a political system to manage the German mind insanity of controlling the world and being the best and the whitest of white people. There's a whole history that we don't get in these classes. I'm sitting as the only black person sitting in Switzerland. And I specifically chose Switzerland because I won a Rotary International Fellowship. They didn't think that the best student from Lafayette College was black. Well, I was black, so I got it. And when I went over there, I had a choice of going to Paris. I'm 80 years old now. Take 60 years old, a 20-year-old Leonard Jefferies. If I can keep my good looks at this late stage, you can imagine how I look like at 20 years old. And so I said, every man knows, having been raised with white folk, that I'm going to go to Paris. I ain't lost nothing on the Champs-Elysees, and I didn't lose anything in Pigalle. I don't need to have women stand in the doorway offering me treats. And so I went to the smallest part I could get in Europe, and that was Switzerland. And it was at that point that Europe was devastated with all of this destruction and death over a 50-year period, and a Great Depression, that they were putting their world back together again. And they started with economics. Dr. Malvo and others who are specialists in this understand that. They started in economics around coal and steel, the Ruhr Valley. They said they had been fighting over the Ruhr Valley, and now in order to get their prosperity back on track, they had to come up with a collective approach to the Ruhr Valley. England, France, and Germany have been fighting over the wealth of the Ruhr Valley, which has led to all of this destruction. So they came up with what they call the European Common Market. And the first thing in order to get together for the common market was economics. So I'm sitting in a class, observing all of this, with these bright youngsters from around the world. And Professor Jhutyms, who was one of the great professors, Professor Oles, these are the Ribin, these are the three professors that were planning the common market. And they would come up, for example, Professor Ribin would say, no society should be so wasteful of their wealth that they could have a 100-day steel strike. Well, what nation had a 100-day steel strike? In 1959-60, it was America. And so when they were outlining this, that we were wasting the wealth, all of those couple hundred students there, because I always sat in the back, all of those couple hundred students started to turn around and look at me. I ain't had nothing to do with America. I'm a part of the African world. But they taught me a lesson. Coal and steel was supposed to be the foundation economically of the rebirth of Europe. But in order to make it work, you had to have a management system. The state governments that we now worship, America's democracy, and France, and this and that, these nations were created to manage the new economics, which was the various branches of capitalism that were coming out of the slave system. Monopoly capitalism is a later version, industrial capitalism, all the stuff that we have now. But you had a commercial capitalism. Sir Eric Lincoln wrote his PhD dissertation on capitalism and slavery. He had the right understanding because Harold Lasky was one of his great teachers. And these were socialists who were dealing with the economic understanding. Of course, they had nothing for Africa in terms of that, except to use Africa's wealth for the development of these European nationalities. But the key to what our people are trying to say is economics is the first principle. You've got to have it or you're not going anywhere. You have to have a management of the economics to make your economics make sense to you. But if you do not have culture, which is the third dynamic of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, if culture is not a part of your equation, the economics that you have will not be meaningfully serving your people. It will be predator economics or whatever version comes out of capitalism and communism. And if you do not have a politics that is a politics of the people, you will have a politics of persons and individuals and organizations not serving the larger masses. So culture makes a difference. African culture is in its essence socialistic. African communalism is socialism in the African way. And we need to read this. We were not supposed to have economics in a Marxist context because you can only reach a level of economic development in terms of industrialization if you have a predator proletariat process. And so Africa has missed that stage. There's no predator proletariat process in Africa. There's no working classes in the way that Marx and Lenin saw it, and that Stalin and others try to put it together. We have to look at our history, our world, our values, and we can do it. And we have the mentality to do it because the mind that is the mind of the human is ours. There's no European mind. There's no Asian mind. There's no Arab mind. The only mind and the only humanity that there is African humanity. And we use the genius of studying the laws of nature and the universe to create systems. So that's what you've got to go back to and understand. We have achieved, but we've achieved at the level of survival culture. To get ready for the 21st century and beyond, we have to go into developmental culture. That means that the wealth that is in Africa cannot be used by others and managed by Negroes who are just out to profit for themselves. It's what I call the Mobutu syndrome. You take a dumbass Negro who was a military man, who takes the Europeans and put them at the head of a nation called the Congo, which he became Zaire, and you let him ruin and exploit this process for 20 to 30 years. We need to study Mobutu, not in terms of a paralysis of analysis, but see how the system created him. He was a military man, and they used him as a military man, knowing that he had been brainwashed into their military to be the head of state. He didn't have any capability of being the head of state, but he had assistants. All these African leaders, as we look through the history and see them try to put these new states together, have what they call conseil technique in the French term. That means your technical council, the one that's really running the show. You're sitting there having a ministerial position and don't know what the hell is happening with the wealth of your nation. We are still tied down with this same leadership that is not being trained to develop for Africa. Well, Dr. J, well, you know so much. Put your goods on the table. How the hell did you know so much? Because I left America, which was the dynamo of the world, and I went to Europe, and I found that the European father of America and mother of America were trying to recreate themselves. And what was they doing? They was trying to put the economic piece together, and then put the political piece together, which is the common market European government. They had the cultural piece. They already told the world that there's only one race of superior being, is white supremacy. So they didn't have to worry about the cultural piece. It was built into the German way of life, the French way of life, the Eastern European way of life, the Italian way of life, the Spanish way of life, the French way of life, the Dutch way of life, the Belgian way of life, the Swedish way of life, the Nordic. They have it built into their culture that they are the superior beings to rule this world. Truth has exploded on the world. And this is the Bible that lays out the truth, civilization and barbarism. And if you don't have it, you ain't going to go but so far in your analysis of systems. Nobody masters systems more than someone called Sheikh Anta Diop. And this is the work that he left us as a legacy of that. And this was the culmination of his 30 to 40 year developing of the African mind. But the first book I got from Sheikh Anta Diop, and Spirit told me that you are in Europe and you're seeing what's going on, you need to get the hell out of here. Because everywhere I went, I was looking for a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I saw these black people in Europe, in Switzerland. And I ran up to these suckers and said, brother, how you doing? Who are you? And he looked at me with a little grin, shitty grin on his face and said, Je suis français. I'm French. I'm looking at this brother, he's as black as the ace of spades. His lips are full, his nose is spread all over his face, his hair is tight, and he got a fat behind. And here he is telling me, so I said, he's crazy. He says there's craziness. So I said, let me find somebody else. I ran up to another brother. Brother, who are you? Where are you from? Je suis français. And he's as black as the other one. These were from Senegal, Mali, from Congo, from the various African nations, Togo, and whatnot. So I gave up on dark black people. You gotta make an adjustment. If you keep doing the same damn thing, you're crazy. So I said, maybe I can find me a light one, like my brother Jeff, the father of Hapi Jefferies and Hassan Jefferies, who was born 21 years after I was born, and he became a part of my life. So I'm looking for some love with one of these white dudes, and I run up to them, brother, who are you? Where are you from? They looked at me and said, Je suis français. Where were they from? Martinique, Guadeloupe, Guyana, the elite of Haiti. The African mind, which we thought was being developed to lead an African world and an African Renaissance and African Revolution, was already programmed to deliver Africa once again to the European system. So if we don't have a systems analysis that we have to go into, break with the Europeans, go into the ancient systems to see how we managed to develop economics linked up to the movement of the heavenly bodies, linked up to the flood of the Nile, how we developed political systems that wasn't just a political leader, you had to be trained. The boys talking about a talented dead. How the hell do you think Africans were able to produce civilization that lasted for thousands and thousands of years? Even after they failed, they grew back and they had a renaissance because they had a training process. the great schools of learning and these universities that are modeled after whatever the French and whatever the Germans and whatever the Americans produce are modeled after the African schools, where you did train a 10% of your population to be special, to be leaders, but to be leaders of what? Your spiritual development, to be leaders of what? You're hooking up with the laws of nature, you're leaders of what? To be hooked up with preparing for the generations yet to become. So we need to look at this whole thing in the African way, and that's why we need an African perspective. And when we do that, and when we Africanize our lives, even this Trump chump will be able to be moved out of the way.
Dr. Monroe had a train to catch, but we promised when the documentary is completed, we're going to have her come back, and we are going to let her express who she is and the wonderful knowledge that she shares. So just wanted to let you know, so she had to leave. I'm going to ask another question. One question, and then we're going to start taking questions from the audience. In relation to Hapi, the documentary, what do you want to see people do after they've seen the documentary? In relation to the documentary. So I've seen it. What do you think we should do? What pieces should we put in place after we've seen the documentary? And I'm not going to go to Dr. J first. Our brother Mfundishi, I'm going to go to you first. Dr. J.
If y'all keep messing with the ancestors and the elders, y'all gonna be in trouble. Now, I haven't been asked by the creator to hang around here for 80 years for nothing. You'll have trouble, because when I get up to the pearly gates and the book of deeds is read and Jhuty and whatnot is checking your asses out, I said they sat there at the Black Theater in Jamaica and just pull my congregation here and give them a few words of wisdom, and y'all gonna make me feel like an ass. No, I know who I am. So forget it. I'll make my contribution when I'm ready, and let's continue with the show.
There's something called operational unity. Operational unity means that you put all the trivial things that don't really mean anything to the side. And those things that are essential for your life, your language, your education, your economic system, your cultural system, your defense system, your agricultural system, your technology system, we come together because all of us need that. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, it doesn't matter. You're Kemetic, you're spiritual, we all need these things. So we need to put all of that to the side, come together, and take care of the things that we need in terms of operational unity. So I'm hoping when people, after they see this, they say, yes, I need to start thinking systematically. I need to start thinking and putting a system together that's going to lead towards my success in every avenue of my life. And economics has to help fund that. But if your real reservoir of money is here, your consciousness. So if you don't change your thinking paradigm, even if I give you the money, look, every year, people hit the lotto. 90% of everybody who hits the lotto 10 years later is broke.
Yes.
In fact, they're more broke than they were before they got the money.
Right.
Because, like I started, their thinking process is faulty.
Right.
And so people, if we don't change, I'm hoping after people see the movie, they begin to start thinking different. Not just a survival culture. I need to start thinking, how do I network with my brothers in Africa? How do I network with the Africans in the diaspora? How do we begin to come together? It's like this bottle shattering and glasses all over the place. And all those pieces of glass is us. We need to start putting them back together. We need to smelt it down and create a new bottle. And we have the ability to do that. So I'm hoping it joggles people's mind. When the sister talk about Booker T. Washington's model, I love that. Because he made the bricks Then he made the building. He was the architect. They grew the food. That's systematic thinking. That's what I'm trying to get in our heads. It was a system set up with systematic thought to be successful. Ancient Kemetic has the first model of that. And so that's why I'm a component of learning the Jhutyms, a component of learning in ancient history, and going back and be able to read how our ancestors did it. Not so we can just duplicate that, so that we can do Sankofa. Go back and fetch the best of what we have, so that we can go forward to the future.
Brothers and sisters, first of all, I'm not going to apologize for being late. I had another responsibility, which was not on Jamaica Avenue, but was in my home village, North New Jersey. And the Masonic institutions came together to hear a message from me, the likes of which they had never heard before. And so they say, we want you to come back. Somebody's got to let us know what this is all about. They've been bamboozled into the Scottish rites and all kinds of other things. And I'm talking about the real learning that comes from the great schools of knowledge that are there. The ruins are there for you to see in the Nile Valley. Not only in Egypt, but go south into islands. Brother Taki and I, let's give him an acknowledgement and a round of applause. Brother Taki, I have to thank you for taking me going, no, but you need to know that this brother we all go to the Nile. We follow Dr. Ben. And even people try to follow Dr. Ben to the Sudan and got lost in the desert. Yes, but luckily there's nothing but desert, so they finally got found. But at any rate, Taki took me to the Giza Plateau. And Mfundishi would have to give you the names of the Sphinx and all the other things. He's got that down. And he's correct. You've got to understand the culture. This is the greatest book that anybody has put together for us. It is 3 parts. Part 1 is the paleontological approach, meaning who are the human beings? And he establishes by scientific information and data that you are. And Glover's law, mammals in the sun develop melanin to resist the ultraviolet rays of the sun. That's a clear reason why you couldn't have blonde-haired white folks in the sun valleys of the world producing civilization and culture. He establishes that in the first 100 pages. But it is so scientific that I had trouble, as brilliant as I am, trying to translate it when I took a sabbatical leave in '83 and went back to Geneva to try to translate this, and that shit was too deep for me. I had to do a whole learning process. I had to get all kinds of books. And then luckily the Creator and the ancestors saved me because there was a struggle in South Africa. I was with the World Council of Churches, and this is when Steve Biko and all our Queen Mother, Winnie, were doing their thing. And Nelson was breaking bricks in Robbins Island. And so there was a struggle that came to the World Bodies of Churches. And I said the World Bodies of Churches is not doing enough to help the struggle in South Africa. And so the head of the World Body of Churches was Professor Scobie's buddy, childhood buddy, Dr. Philip Potter. And Dr. Philip Potter said, Dr. Jefferies, if we're not doing enough in helping the struggle in South Africa, I'm going to put you in charge of a task force so that you can help the world churches to deliver for the struggle in South Africa. And boy, I almost wet my pants because that saved me. I was sinking with this brilliant work. There's no way in hell I could have gotten through with all the scientific. Diop in the first 100 pages is not speaking to you or I, he's speaking to the whole tradition of science that the Europeans developed. He took it on and he summarized it in 100 pages. That nobody has done anything like that. This is absolute and complete brilliance. This is the Imhotep of our time. And so you got to understand what this represents. Then it makes 100 pages, and then he takes for us, gives us our heritage. African heritage goes back even past Dankanesh, which is the find in Ethiopia that they refer to as Lucy. And that goes back almost 3.8 million years, almost 4 million years. So we know that Africans were walking and taking care of business that long. So there is an African origin of humankind millions of years ago, not 6,000, millions of years ago. If you want to talk about a date, talk about 6 million years ago. Africans emerged, early African. And then early African evolved and into the later African. So modern, large brain humanity is part 2 of the upswing, where he talks about the evolution of society. And that evolution is in Africa just like the origin is in Africa. And he talks about putting the economics, politics, and culture together 200,000 years ago for modern humankind. That's African, as well as the origin millions of years ago is African, as well as the last 100 pages is the African contribution to modern society and science and philosophy. That's dealing with the last 10,000 years. That's the Nile Valley civilization that you see in Hapi. But there's a whole culture and knowledge bank that you got to tap into that goes beyond the Nile Valley. And then you can't stay in Kemetic. You got to go to the Sudan. And you got to deal with what was developed in the Sudan. Then you got to go to the highlands of Ethiopia and see that context. This is what this brother did. Now, the smallest chapter is just a 40-page chapter. And what is that on? Not history, not paleontology, not in Egyptology. That 40-year chapter is on culture. If you do not know your culture, if you do not speak your languages, if you do not know the values of your language and your culture, nothing you can do will move you where you need to go. What will happen after this bill? They'll try to block it. They'll find weaknesses in it. What should happen is we should have a place like this packed, as if there was a rock concert.
Yes.
But we have us. So we're the chosen ones to begin the movement. And to make sure we start reaching out first and foremost to our own immediate relationships, and then to our families, then to our communities, then to our institutions. Black lives don't matter. That ain't a damn thing about black lives that matter. Just like that Wall Street thing don't matter. What matters is African lives. And if you don't Africanize your life, you ain't going nowhere.